From the Classic 107 studios in downtown Winnipeg, 107 Live for Birchwood Jaguar, the art of performance.
And welcome to Birchwood Jaguar 107 Live. This morning in the studio, we have a couple of musicians, singers. We've got Glenn Buhr and we have Margaret Sweatman. They've got a concert happening tomorrow night at the St. Norbert Arts Centre. It's called Glenn Buhr with the Broken Songs Band. He'll be joined by Margaret Sweatman, Alan Beardsell, and Gilles Fournier. And Glenn is, he's been around the scene for a long time, professor of music, composition, and improv at the Wilfrid Laurier University, jazz musician, classical musician. He was responsible for, along with Bramwell Tovey, getting the New Music Festival underway. His partner in music is Margaret Sweatman, I should say music and life. Margaret Sweatman, award-winning author, playwright, singer, and songwriter. She's performed with the WSO, Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony Orchestra, and they're both in the studio this morning to play some music and to have a chat. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming in this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You guys are bright-eyed and cheery for this time of the day. A lot of musicians come in and moan that they got to come in at 8:30, but I know you guys have a life outside of that, so you're used to getting up in the morning. So before we chat, you're going to play us a song. What do you got lined up for us?
This is a song that's, I built a bunch of classical pieces on it, some jazz pieces on it. This is the root of the song. It's called While a Baby Sleep, and it's based on a jazz standard called St. James Infirmary.
I know the one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a listen.
Sun's going down on the town, and the innocent ones do weep. There's a goodly soul getting tied to the gallows pole, while the babies sleep. What is a king? What is a queen? What do the angels say? The jester shatters the figurine, and the old world fades away. He's old and cold, and the wisest of men, and the crows have taken his eyes. He reconciles with his kin. Then all the good men, blinded or bound, and the great ladies rejoice. English daisy. There's a tempest on the heath. Cordelia lies in a funeral pyre. The mourners weep. The sun goes down and takes her fire, while the babies sleep.
Very nice. Glenn Buhr playing the banjo and playing the shaker, and the backup vocals, Margaret Sweatman over there as well. That's you know what? Beautiful song. I definitely recognize St. James Infirmary right away for sure, but you wrote your own lyrics to that one. Glenn, let's start with you for a sec. So we were chatting for a second off air, and you said you're back in town now. You're on a bit of a sabbatical. What's happening?
Well, that's right. Actually, I haven't really ever left town. Margaret teaches university at the University of Winnipeg. She's sort of, along with Catherine Hunter, coordinating all the creative writing there. So what she does here is kind of what I do at Wilfrid Laurier University, but it happens to be in Kitchener-Waterloo instead of here. So we end up on an airplane meeting up at weekends, sort of like, I guess, MPs that have to get out to Ottawa and then come home on the weekends. That's sort of what our life is like.
And you charge the taxpayers, right?
Well, actually, no. Kind of all comes out of our own pocket. But myself, anyway, I'm quite lucky because I do a lot of other production, you know, kind of separate from my teaching work and all that. And some of that's in Kitchener-Waterloo, some's in Toronto, and some here. Like the show that we're doing tomorrow night, for example, is something that I've been planning for a while. As one of the corners of my life is my songwriting, very separate from my jazz work and the work I do at classical groups. And because I'm performing myself and writing a lot of the lyrics myself, although Margaret does help me a lot with that. So I'm kind of centering a lot of my songwriting work here in Winnipeg now these days, because one thing I love about this town is, well, there's a lot I love about it because I grew up here, but I think the music scene is kind of centered in a songwriting kind of world. Like the folk festival, for example, is a huge success. It always has been. It started when I was in my late years in high school, and there's a lot of musicians, very mature musicians now, that kind of grew up around that whole culture. And the result is it's generated some good instrumental music, but some really excellent songwriting. And Canada is kind of permeated with this sort of excellent foundation of songs, you know, which I feel is the foundation of all music. So, I mean, your background is primarily classical and jazz. I mean, I've seen you perform a number of times, mostly on piano. I've never seen you play banjo before. So have you always been playing guitar and banjo, or? It's funny you should say that. A lot of people think my background is that way because that's how I came into the public life, actually, especially with classical music, because after I graduated, my music was, my concert music written for orchestras was championed by some pretty major players like the Toronto Symphony, the Montreal Symphony, and then eventually I was appointed here in Winnipeg, and we started the New Music Festival, which had a big impact in the world of classical music. So it was kind of hard for me to be recognized as anything else. But when that was over, I started thinking a lot more about our own culture, because in fact, I think I mentioned to you at the break that my classical music is Neil Young, because, you know, he grew up here, you know, just like I did. I was a real fan when I was in my late teens, and I played all of his songs and all of his companion songs, and it was so. And when I saw him play here solo about 4 or 5 years ago, I was almost in tears afterward, like everyone else was. It was a great show, but I thought, no, this is my classical music, you know. So that's one of the reasons why I felt I needed to get back to it, just because I think artists, you have to know who you are, and if the world makes you into something other than who you are, then your work's not going to be very good.
Mm-hmm. So this new book that you've written, it's called Our Native Song: Essays on Music. What? Tell me a little bit about it. What's it all about?
Well, I think the title kind of explains it. Our native land. It comes from our national anthem, but it's sort of based on a book that I read by Jane Jacobs, who's she's a lot of things, sort of a social philosopher.
But Jane's Walk?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Jane's Walk, Jane Jacobs.
Yeah.
She wrote a book shortly after the Bush started his war in Iraq, and there was a lot of talk at that time. The United States is becoming another Roman Empire. As certainly we know now, things are pretty scary in the States, and we got a lot of qualms about how they run their government and all that stuff. But she was making this point that, in fact, they're not really like the Roman Empire at all, because the Roman Empire went out conquering, and they brought their culture in from the provinces that they conquered. Whereas America has a culture at its real core. And when I read this book, I thought she had I just actually want to read, I quoted this in my book, and I'm going to read it out loud right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is actually from Jane Jacobs, and she's talking about American music.
Okay.
She's not talking about American power, she's talking about American music. And this is what she has to say. American culture is saturated with heart and emotion. It revels in the richness of its indigenous arts. In song alone, America has gospel music and blues, songs of labor unions, cowboys and chain gangs, hits from musicals and films, country music, jazz, ballads, sea shanties, rock and roll, and rap, patriotic, war, anti-war, and seasonal songs, advertising ditties, nursery rhymes, school, campfire, drinking, homesick and love songs, lullabies, revival hymns, plus disrespectful parodies of the lot. And I thought, hey, now that's a more upbeat definition of the United States than we're usually getting, especially these days, because when you think about it, it's actually true, And so my book was more about, well, that's America, and we're close to America, but we're not America. So I thought, well, as an artist in music, where I've had this success in the classical world, what does that mean culturally? And I came up with this thesis that all music is folk music, including classical music, because back in the 17th, 18th century, that music was written for folk. It was written for the upper classes in Europe, and they were all educated to know how to understand and appreciate the music. Usually tutorial. It wasn't huge classrooms like we see in universities. So because the parents were wealthy, and so they could afford tutorials for everything, including music. This is where the idea of private lessons came along. So that's what we inherited from the classical music scene. But that was their folk music. They were folk, and it was very natural for them. And it's one of the reasons why I love Mozart, but I kind of feel uncomfortable with the style, because it's not the style I grew up with. It's not as cool as the style of our own music. We always say that. So my book is a bit of an exploration of our own music and where it might go. And I feel that Canada is a very new culture relative to Europe, relative to even certainly relative to our own indigenous population here, and we're a long way off from finding that.
Yeah, let's say 500 years from now, what will our classical
exactly?
music be?
And in my analysis said, well, it's going to be based on our songs, because that's really strong already. And even when I was a teenager, it was strong. I studied and learned the music of Joni Mitchell and Gordon Lightfoot and Leonard Cohen.
Absolutely.
And of course Neil Young, who kind of emerged out of the Bob Dylan kind of scene with a relatively new musical style. And the thing I love about Neil Young is that he's never stopped. He kept on going. He figured out a way to function in a musical system which kind of was working against anyone that turns 30, right? And I find that pretty interesting. So the rockers that have managed to find their way into their 70s, what's happened in the music, So I'm studying that a lot more than I used to study a lot of, European expressionist music and all that stuff, and sort of moved into this realm. And the book is sort of a summary of those sorts of things.
Cool. And it's available?
It's available online. You can find, like anything these days, all you have to do is Google the title, Our Native Song, and my name, and you'll find it.
Well, and speaking of books, thanks, Glenn. Swing it over to Margaret there for 1 second. Margaret, you're thank you for coming in this morning. Appreciate it. So your main gig has always been, or for a long time, been with words and writing. So what are you up to these days, and when did music come into your life?
Well, before I met Glenn, we've been married now for 20 years, but and when I met him about 23 years ago or something, I was working with jazz musicians writing what we called jazz drama, and very interested in the melodies of sentences, and so then when I started working with Glenn, we started doing spoken word improvisation, often right in the studio, recording it as we made it up. And then it's merged into song. We wrote a musical together called Flux that we still love and would like to develop. And so more and more into, I think the form was very open at first, and we've kind of worked into song, and I think we're going to move back into more open form again. So I think language is so melodic, anyway. And phonemes.
Yeah. And what about, are you doing any writing these days other than the music?
Last novel was 2014. I've got a novel that getting close to flogging out in the world.
You want to give us a hint? What's it about?
The one that I'm working on now is set in the Vietnam War, 63 to 70 or so. So I'm drawn to sort of our histories, stories of origin, and the Canadian relationship with the Vietnam War. So yeah, I think it's, in a way, we intersect. We talk a lot, Glenn and I, because we're always interested in how to define the power structures that are determining our culture, which is, in that. So war, of course, is one of the military industrial complex. I'm fascinated by that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't want to get too involved in that, I think, just more from
home.
Home, exactly. All right, thank you, Margaret. So we got another song coming up. What's next? And this is the kind of stuff you're going to be playing tomorrow night, right?
Yeah, we'll be doing some of this music, and also tomorrow night. It's at the St. Norbert Arts Centre. It starts at 7:30, by the way.
I'll give all those details.
We're actually filming and recording it too. We're hoping to use some of the beds we get for a new recording. And this next song is a very recent song, and it's very close to me, but because it's a dream song. Some people make songs out of their dreams. We go back into that place that's a little bit more magical, so you can communicate with other people that also have dreams. The dream I had was I met Igor Stravinsky, one of my probably my favorite composer, actually. And he shook my hand, and he morphed into Neil Young, and I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting.
I just before you get started, I got to tell you a funny story quickly. Last night, ironically, I dreamed that I was dancing with my wife, and Neil Young came up to us and asked us if we wanted to dance together. So the three of us all danced together.
Holy
I swear
smokes.
I just
and here we are.
Here we are. All right, let's
So
take
this
it away.
is I Shook Hands with Igor Stravinsky.
Glenn Buhr and Margaret Sweatman.
Stravinsky plucked a new old familiar chord from every tree. I joined a crowd of fallen angels. We walked towards the sunrise, spent from a night of dancing and crying and singing and lying. We walked on with grace and terror in our eyes. Shadows cover band. She moves through the night and tries every door. When she finds the one that opens, she'll curse the gods in love and have everything she had and know everything she knew before. In a dream, she meets Igor Stravinsky. His heart as cold as stone. She scolds him and kisses him. Then starts the long walk home.
It's a fun one, actually.
Country waltz,
Yeah.
based on some ideas about Stravinsky.
Glenn Buhr and Margaret Sweatman, they've been in the studio chatting and playing some music. After the flood, Glenn Buhr with the Broken Songs Band at St. Norbert Arts Centre tomorrow night, 7:30 to 9:30. You can get your tickets at eventbrite.ca. And they're performing a whole bunch of music with a quartet, actually. They're going to be joined by Alan Beardsell and Gilles Fournier. So thank you guys for coming in this morning. Pick up their book, listen to their music. It's a lot of fun stuff.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mike.
That was fun.
Thank you. Going to wrap up the show in 1 second with a little track called The Blue Mandarin.
107 Live is Classic 107's intimate concert series, brought to you by Birchwood Jaguar, the art of performance.